Alright, this video is going to be a fairly quick run through of the controller. This is the dual transport controller, although they all pretty much look the same. It depends on what we build them out to be. So it's sitting here powered up at the idle prompt, waiting for a delivery, but we're not going to do a delivery. We're going to show you all or most of the setup options. Now I can get into the setup a couple of ways. When it first powers up, it gives you an option of hitting a key to get into the setup, but I wanted to show you this. If it's sitting there like this, you can just hit the 0 key a number of times. That way you don't have to catch it. It didn't ask me for a password there, so anybody could get in, but there is an option of setting a password. So we'll look at the first category here, general setup, and 1 and 4 will scroll up and down. And then yes is the same as enter, so hit yes on that. And then you see all your different values of your parameters and what their current setting is. You don't have to keep digging in to see, oh, what is the value of that? So let's say we want to set this to liters instead, so you just hit enter on it and pick which one you want, but I really want to use gallons. Password, this is where you would define a password, and we'll just quickly do that so that not just anybody can get in. Password's not set one yes. It does make you use a 7-digit password, but that's not too long. Okay, and then you can set the date, set the time. I'm not going to bore you with all of the details. There are alarm outputs on these. That's generally used at a fixed location like a bulk plant. You can use the alarm options to trigger an external device such as a horn or a flashing light. And here's where you would define whether it flashes or stays on. So we'll go back. No always jumps you back to a previous menu. So yes is forward and no is backward. USB options is where, there's a flash drive in here that records everything. If you don't care about that, you can say no, it doesn't have to have a flash drive, but if you don't want to deliver any additive without it being accounted for, then you would want to require the drive. And then using the flash drive, if you were, say, going to install a bunch of these and they were all going to have all the same settings, the import-export settings would be a way to dump all those parameters and then use a single flash drive image, so to speak, and make sure they're all programmed the same way. So we'll get back to firmware. This is, since we write the programming for really custom, there's often some adjustments that a customer might want us to make and how the thing runs. So we can send you new firmware, and this would be where you would you'd put a firmware file on your flash drive, and you would go here to apply it. After general setup, it goes to the meat and potatoes, heart of the matter, transport setup. First option is calibrate meter. We put that as the first option because once it's set up, that's probably going to be what you're going in here for, is to do a calibration once a year. And we'll just look quickly at what that looks like. So if I want to calibrate the meter, I'll hit yes. And this is a dual system, so we've got gasoline and diesel. Let's say I want to calibrate the diesel one. First thing it does is ask me how much do I want to pump. You can use this a couple of different ways. If you have a container and you do this every year, and the container is, let's say, a gallon, and every year it pretty much comes in right, you could tell it to pump a gallon and walk away and come back and just check it. But if another way to do it is, if you have a gallon container, you could tell it you want to pump 2 gallons, and then it's not going to pump any more than that, but you can always use the ball valve and at exactly at a gallon shut it off and then tell it to stop. So let's simulate that. Let's say I want to pump 2 gallons. And then say yes. So now it would be running the pump. It would be counting up. And right when I get to a gallon, I would shut the ball valve. And you see I can press N to stop the pump. So I would shut the ball valve at a gallon. I'd come over here and hit no. So it would stop. Then it would say, I think I've pumped a gallon, is that correct? And you would say yes. Or it would say whatever it thinks it pumped. You would say no, you pumped a gallon. In this case, we didn't really pump anything, so it says no pulses received. But I'm going to say no, we don't need to try it again. But that's a calibration procedure. It is detailed in your manual as well. And you can always call this phone number if you need any help. Allow multi-drop is somewhat unique to this controller. This question is asking, you've got 2 pump modules, you've got 8 valves. Do we want the delivery guy, is he legally allowed to drop and additize more than one container at a time, more than one compartment? If he's legally not allowed to, then you would leave that allow multi-drop to no, and that'll force him to only be able to drop one compartment at a time. If he, however, does want to do multi-drop, you would turn that on. Then you can make up to 4 drops simultaneously, additizing all of them, and that would all be recorded and you could watch it work. So that's what that parameter is. Now, staying in the transport setup, the next sections are the diesel section and the gas section. Under the diesel section, you have to program it at what your drop rate is. When you put a hose in the ground and you're dropping fuel, we need to know what your gallons per minute is, because we're not metering it on a transport. So you would set that. Additive pulse per gallon, you can manually set that, and we set it to a number before it leaves the factory. Or that will be set for you when you do a calibration. But generally it's going to be around 7550. Could be 76, 7800, but you're not going to have 10 or 4 or 0. So if you've got a really weird number in there, you might set it back to 7550 from the factory. Treat rate. This is going to be different between the diesel and the gas. Whatever your additive company has told you your treat rate is, and it's in parts per million. So this is set to 1,000 parts per million, but let's say it's a seasonal thing and we're going to adjust it. So we'll hit enter. Let's change the treat rate to 400 parts per million. That's it. I'm done. I can get out. I don't have to recalibrate or anything else. The only other 2 options on the diesel are the minimum inject and max behind. Minimum inject is when you're dropping fuel. I don't want to open the valve and do a squirt every gallon because it would just wear the valve out in no time. So we're not going to open the valve unless we owe at least 0.01 gallons of additive. Again, you can set that to whatever, but that just helps spread the delivery of additive out across the delivery of fuel. And max behind is an alarm threshold for if I'm trying to open the valve and I'm trying to run the pump and additive is not being put into the fuel, how far behind can it get before I cause an alarm condition? And I've set that to 0.05 gallons. So that's it. The other parameters are for the gasoline side. It's all of the same questions, so you'll obviously have a different treat rate, but your other options will probably be the same. The next item is totalizers. There are totalizers in here which we feel are pretty accurate, but they'll give you a pretty good totalizer count. If we go into that, it'll totalize the additive for the diesel and the additive for the gas. You can reset that anytime you'd like, or just let it rack up. Then we've got diagnostics. Diagnostics is handy for an installer if he wants to incrementally test things as he hooks this up, or if the system's been running for a while and you just you think something's not right. Pulse inputs is a way to, you could go to this and then you could go touch your wires apart and back together at the meter, and you should see the counter incrementing. If you're going to get into the diagnostics, you probably would be smart to call us and we'll help you explain how to implement these. But the diagnostics are there simply to help someone figure out what's going on or if it is working correctly. Handle inputs we don't really use on a transport. That's more of a bulk plant or a bulk fuel delivery truck. Sensor inputs. In this situation, sensor 0 and sensor 1 are both your float switches on your tanks. Sensor 2 is not being used, so you can see they're both on because I have those jumper switches on. Selector inputs are not being used on this one. Those are analog readings. Valve relays. This would be a way, once you have all 8 valves connected, that you could have it click through and it will pull those valves so you can make sure they're hooked up correctly and functioning. I'm going to say no to that. Onboard relay test, we don't really need to do. Primary and secondary outputs, pulse outputs, alarm outputs. These are things that really aren't implemented on this software too much. Again, if you think there's a problem with the keypad, there's a keypad test in here, and it basically tells you to test all the buttons, test your lights. And as a fail-safe, you got factory defaults. If you just really messed this up and you want to get to a starting point, you can apply the factory defaults. But that's everything in the main menu. I'm going to go to exit now, and that's our run through on all the setup options. I hope this was helpful.